Hi. Oh, there it is. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Natalia, and I'm working in Microsoft with Microsoft Purview. And today, I'm going to be joined by two of my great colleagues to talk to you about how we're integrating data security into the Security Operations Center. And if that's OK with you, from now on, we're going to refer to Security Operations Center as SOC, as most of you probably call it. So I know it's Thursday, it's snowing outside, it's after lunch. So let's try to keep this a little bit interactive, OK? And it's a dark room. I want to understand a little bit about the audience before we start talking. So who of you came to the session interested in this theme, mostly because you work more with Defender? Raise your hands. Good. Who is here because you mostly work with Purview? OK, so we have a little bit of both. And we're going to have something for all of you today. So you're going to see it. So today, we're going to talk a little bit about how data security can actually improve SOC investigations. We are going to show you a little bit about what we've already been doing with the Purview and Defender XDR integration to help with that experience. And the most important piece, what we're bringing this Ignite on the new integrations of Purview with XDR. So before we start, let me start with let me ask you a kind of an obvious question, so please bear with me. Who of you, raise your hands, have directly dealt with an incident that started from a phishing attack, or your nosy organization had to deal with that? So raise your hands. Phishing. Yeah. So you can see you're not alone, right? And phishing is a very good example of a very common type of attack that actually can hinder to a very complicated topic that would be a compromised user. And with the AI, this type of scenario is becoming each day more convincing. So we need to provide the SOC analysts, the SOC teams, with the best solutions for them to be able to fight those attacks, right? So now that we know that this is important for everybody, let's take a look at a possible real-life case scenario of how the lack of data security context could actually hinder the investigations on an external threat. So here we have Mary. Mary is a very trusted employee. She works in a lot of confidential projects, and because of that, she has access to a lot of sensitive data. But one day, Mary receives an email. The email looks legit, and that email is asking her to log in her credentials into a system. She doesn't see anything wrong with that. She does log in that system with her credentials, and that's it. That was a phishing email, and now Mary's credentials have been compromised. So now what's happening is that there is an external attack inside the organization posing as Mary, and they have access to the sensitive data that she has access to. The tricky thing about the situation is that that external attacker is not only getting access to all of that juicy data and exfiltrating all at once. No, they're covering their tracks. They're doing it slowly. They're doing it in what we call a multi-stage attack. They first get access to that data, downgrade those labels, then they try to slowly exfiltrate that data. That's what we call a multi-stage attack. And because that happens in a slow way, they're covering their tracks, and the SOC analyst didn't necessarily, in this case, have the context of the data severity, the severity of the data that was involved. That attack might have gone undetected by the normal anomaly checks. And because of that, the attack went on for longer, more exfiltration was done, and no proper remediation was put in place. So that's how bad it can be, right? So how can we use data to make that better, right? Data context into the SOC experience to make that better. Let's take a look at the two big personas that I just identified here in the audience. So the SOC analyst and the data security admin. So we know that the SOC analysts, they care a little bit more about the breadth of the investigation, right? How far my threat landscape goes, all the types of attacks that I can have. On the other hand, the data security admins, they care about the depth of the investigation. So which type of data is being targeted? What are the files? What activities are being risky that might pose some sort of danger to my sensitive data, right? So do we think that most of the times the SOC analysts, they do have what it takes and what they need to actually triage and prioritize the incidents they're taking care of based on the severity of the data that's involved? A lot of the times, they don't have it. So most of the time, SOC analysts, they need to handle a lot of different solutions to get access to that data context. They need to reach out to different solutions, manually correlate data to actually know what type of user interaction, what type of sensitivity was being involved in that incident. And because of that, most of the times, that investigation becomes much more reactive than proactive. So we know that for the SOC experience, having access to that relevant data to certain incidents is super important. They can do better investigations, they can do faster investigations, and better mitigate possible external attacks. And just leaving you with a fun fact. Last year alone, 63% of data leaks leaks happened because inadvertent, malicious, or negligent insiders, like Mary. So because of that, it's even more important for the SOC admins to have access to that data so that they can have the right context to perform their investigations. I see some nods, so I imagine some of you are agreeing with me. So when we talk, I've been talking a lot about data, and some of you are more familiar with Defender, some of you are more familiar with Purview. But I think it's very important because when we talk about securing data, we're talking and protecting it, we're talking about Microsoft Purview. And it comes in place with a comprehensive and integrated set of solutions to help you keep your most important asset, your data, safe. So Microsoft Purview brings you information protection, insider risk management, and data loss prevention together to protect your data at rest, your data in transit, and for you to understand the user interactions with that data. Because something that we always say, data doesn't move itself, people move data. So we need to be able to understand what type of interactions people in your organization are having with that data to better protect and put protections in place. Let's take a look at those. For those who are not that familiar with Purview, let's take a look at the Purview solution. So information protection helps you discover, classify, and label your data. Data loss prevention is the one you use to actually create, define, apply policies to protect your data from being, for example, leaked or exfiltrated. And insider risk management helps you discover hidden risks based on possibly risky activities of your insiders with your data, right? And bringing them together, we have adaptive protection. So adaptive protection is a capability from Purview that brings them together by leveraging insider risk information to identify users that can be riskier. And then that way we can apply stronger protections for those riskier users. That way you don't hinder your productivity when you're applying stronger policies, right? And the key to Purview is to use all those solutions together, as the synergy of them is what brings the power of seeing everything in a holistic view. So let me give you an example. When you use, for example, information protection with data loss prevention, you're able to auto-classify your important data, and that classification is going to be leveraged by data loss prevention on your DLP policies to make sure that that specific type of information doesn't go away. Great, right? So this is all the power of Purview, and you've probably seen it in multiple sessions so far. Keep that in mind. That synergy is going to be leveraged when we bring data security context into Defender XDR. Great? So because the threat landscape is so evolving, remember I told you about AI and phishing emails are going to become every day more convincing? Like the threat landscape is going to change every day. It's going to become each day harder for defenders to actually do their job and keep data and other assets of an organization protected. So it's very important that we give these integrated solutions to SOC analysts, and because data is most of the time the primary target of the attack, that is so important to have data security context into the SOC experience. And that's also because why we're so excited to keep, for the past few years, to be integrating Purview, increasingly integrating Purview into Defender XDR. For those who are not that familiar with the integration, how does that work, right? So in Defender, you have a lot of the context of the incident. You know how it is. You have the timeline, you have the device, for example, that was involved. When you bring context in Purview into the mix, that's where it gets a little bit more saucy. So you're going to be able to see the severity of the data. You're going to be able to see the activity of the users that are interacting with the data in that incident. And that's where you can, and that's where that integration adds a missing piece to the incident timeline, for example, that the SOC analyst had up until now. That way, with everything at the same place, they can do faster investigations and more complex investigations. The cool thing here is that this native integration brings everything into Defender. So remember I told you about the fragmented landscape? They had to go through a lot of solutions. Now you don't have it anymore. You see all the data security context into the Defender XDR. Great? So how have we been doing that in Microsoft, right? Up until now, we have already provided data security context from user and correlated exfiltration activities by adding DLP alerts into the Defender XDR incident timeline. So that's already generally available. Folks have been already using it, but we're not stopping there. We're bringing now the new generation of integrations of Purview with Defender XDR. We're providing faster and more efficient investigations with new contextual insider risk insights. I'm not going to spoil anymore. I'm going to ask my colleagues to give you a little bit more context with our demos. So to give you more color about how we've already been doing that, what we've already been providing to the SOC analysts with data security context into the SOC experience, I'm going to invite Shaker to the stage.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Natalia. Hello, everyone. My name is Shaker Palta. I'm a product manager responsible for Microsoft Purview Data Loss Prevention. Super, super excited to be here. And I hope you have had a great Ignite so far. Today, I'm going to take you through the current experience that we have in the Defender portal, and we'll see how SOC teams can leverage the rich data security context from Purview as they go through their security investigations. And and we'll walk through the same real-world scenario that Natalia was talking about. Remember, Mary Jensen? So it all starts with Mary Jensen, an employee in Contoso, receiving a seemingly urgent email that requires her to take an action. This, of course, is a phishing email. She ends up clicking on this email, and the attackers gain access to her credentials. Now, this can potentially kickstart a multi-stage incident involving exfiltration, which might go unnoticed if SOC teams do not have the right data security context as they go through their security investigations in Defender. But let's look at this from the point of view of a SOC analyst. And to do that, let me just quickly switch over to my demo. Boom, it works. OK. So Bruno is a SOC analyst in Contoso. They log in one fine morning to their incident queue in Defender, and they immediately notice that there is a high severity multi-stage incident that involves initial access and exfiltration. And we can see over here that there are a number of DLP alerts as well as Microsoft Defender for Office alerts that are correlated within the same incident. Let's find out more about this. We click on the incident, it opens up the incident summary page. And generally, the most appropriate way to address or to start investigating a multi-stage incident is to start from the attack story timeline on the left. So let's start from the top. The first 3 alerts over here that you see are coming from Microsoft Defender for Office. And they indicate that Mary Jensen received a phishing email. And in the 3rd alert, you can see that she actually ended up clicking on the phishing email, and potentially her credentials were compromised. We also see something very interesting here. We see there are data loss prevention alerts correlated contextually within the same incident. Now, before we deep dive here, remember, not every external attacker situation might involve sensitive data exfiltration as well. However, that is definitely not the case over here. And we can deduce that because we see data loss prevention alerts correlated within the same incident. It's also intuitive for the SOC analyst to determine that Mary Jensen herself, who's an employee in Contoso, might not be the one exfiltrating the sensitive content out. It might be the attacker who gained access to her credentials and now is exfiltrating sensitive data. But we want to find out more, right? Let's dig into this DLP alert. So when we look at the first DLP alert, this is about a file called as projectdetails.pdf, which was uploaded to a cloud location from an endpoint device. If we look at the description of the policy that matched over here, This policy is set up to detect and block exfiltration activities for highly confidential labeled files for Project Obsidian. So this means this activity was blocked, which is great. But let's dig into the details. We want to find out more. So if we click over here, we can see that this activity was actually carried out from a corporate VM, which is eDLP VM3. And if we scroll down further, we can see that this attempt was made to a non-business domain, which is mag7upload.com. If we go further down, we can see that this document was also labeled as highly confidential. And the enforcement mode indicates that this policy actually applied and blocked this exfiltration attempt. We can also use other features available over here, including the ability to view the full file over here to investigate. But let's think about what happened here. So the attacker got access to Mary's credentials, logged into a corporate VM, tried to exfiltrate a highly confidential labeled document, but DLP policy acted and it blocked that attempt. Let's see what else has happened. There are other DLP alerts as well over here. Let's see. So when we click on the second DLP alert, we see that this time a zip file, images.zip, was uploaded to a cloud location from an endpoint device. And if you look at the policy description, this policy is set up to detect an alert when a non-business critical document like a non-Office, non-PDF, or non-labeled file is exfiltrated out from an endpoint device. And because this policy is scoped or is targeted to non-business critical documents, this policy is set up in audit mode to just alert, but does not block the end user operation. I want to find out more about what's happening. I click on the event, and I see over here something very interesting. This activity also happened from the same VM, eDLP VM3. We also see that this activity was allowed to go through, and the upload was made to the same domain, mag7upload.com, that we saw in the previous alert. And we scroll down and we see the enforcement mode was audit. This means that this operation actually went through. Now this is making my alarm bells go off in a big way. I want to find out what happened. In the previous alert, we saw that the DLP policies actually blocked that exfiltration attempt, but here a zip file went through. I want to find out more. As I scroll to the user, I see something very interesting. It says that this user is flagged with high user risk. I want to find out more. Let's click on this. Now this opens Mary Jensen's Insider Risk Activity Summary. I like to describe this with 3 C's. This is a chronologically ordered, contextual, and a correlated risky sequence of activities detected for this user. And all of this is powered through Microsoft Purview Insider Risk Management, and it is available contextually within your Defender portal as you're going through your security incident. And because of the risky set of activities that was detected over here, this user was actually flagged with high insider risk severity. And you can see over here. And it also provides you with an activity timeline of all risky activities detected over here. This is where the story really begins to unfold. We can see over here that there are a sequence of activities detected, and the attacker actually started with downgrading labels of sensitive files on corporate SharePoint sites. They then proceeded to download those files onto the corporate VM, zip them up, and exfiltrate it to their cloud location. And to cover their tracks, they also deleted those files from the device. This is really interesting because the attacker, you can see, is adopting various techniques to stay under the radar and out of sight. But all of this context coming together in your security incident is really arming the SOC with all the details they need to understand the end-to-end attack story. Without this context, it might be fairly possible for a SOC team to really underestimate or undermine the risk associated with the incident. But there's more to this incident. We have another DLP alert over here. Let's look at this. Let's dive into this alert. So here, we see that there is another zip file, this time more images.zip, which was uploaded to a cloud location from an endpoint device. And if we look at the policy description of the policy that matched, we know that this time this activity was blocked. I want to find out more. Let's click into the event. Here we can see that the same VM was used. The attempt was also made to the same target domain, max7upload.com, that we saw. But if we scroll down, we see that the enforcement mode was blocked. This means that this activity was blocked. Now, in the context of this incident, this is interesting because we saw a very similar activity in the previous alert, images.zip, which was allowed to go through. But this one was blocked. Why do you think that happened? Anyone? All right, let me break the suspense for you. This is because we saw how a risky sequence of activities was detected against the user in the previous alert. The system associated a high insider risk severity with that user, and the system then adapted itself and started enforcing more restrictive DLP controls for this user and prevented any further damage from happening. This, my friends, is adaptive protection in action, which is generally available today. And you just saw that in action. All right. Now, this is such an important topic. Let's drain this for a minute. Now, and I want to draw your attention to the graphic on the right of your screen. This is really adaptive protection's magic at work. So you can put in place DLP policies that are dynamic in nature and can put differentiated controls based on the risk level of the user. This means that if a user is flagged with minor risk or low risk, you can put in place a DLP policy control that shows only a policy tip to the end user, educates them about what they should be doing. If the user is flagged with moderate risk, you can put in place DLP policies that are set up to block with the ability for the end user to override and provide a justification. But if the user is an elevated risk user or high risk user, your DLP policies can completely block any exfiltration attempts. This is adaptive protection, and this is available already in a tenant near you. Now, and this is the reason why we saw the block happen in the previous incident as well. In the third DLP alert, we saw that the zip file was prevented from going out, even though in the second DLP alert that operation was allowed. That is because adaptive protection came into play, preventing any further damage. Now, a lot has actually happened in this incident so far. Let's do a quick recap. So it all started with Mary Jensen receiving a phishing email. The attackers got access to her credentials, and then these attackers adopted various techniques to stay under the radar and exfiltrate sensitive content. We also saw how SOC teams could leverage the rich data security context coming from Purview to understand the end-to-end attack story. In addition, we saw that adaptive protection kicked in based on the increasing risk level of the user and prevented any further damage from happening. Isn't this awesome? We're not stopping here. We're not stopping here, my friends. At this Ignite, we are announcing a bunch of new capabilities, which is further going to enrich that data security context coming from Purview into your Defender portal. And to take you through those awesome announcements, I'll invite my friend and colleague, Shravan.
Thank you, Shekhar. That was an awesome demo. I'm Shravan Kumar Mehra. I'm a product manager with Microsoft Purview. Over the next part of the session, we'll spend some time trying to understand how can you use the new capabilities that we'll be announcing to investigate the same scenario better and faster. Just to give some context, what Shekhar presented just now is the features that we already have available on how a SOC analyst can leverage these signals to understand exfiltration better. But with data-based attacks on the rise, we've added some new capabilities to help the SOC analysts even go faster on some of these attacks. So with that, I want to start with our first announcement, where we're announcing the integration of insider risk management alerts in Microsoft Defender XDR incident investigation. Now, some of you might think, insider XDR, I want to give some context here. Insider risk management typically pivots on a user and user behaviors to understand the data security risk. This user can be an insider who's acting on their own, or it can also be an external attacker who has compromised a user identity and acting on their behalf, like the scenario we've seen with Mary Johnson before. So let's take an example to understand some of these alerts in action. Right? Let's switch to the demo so that we can show you some cool examples here. Give me a second. All right. This is a familiar view by now for you. So let's start with the incidents page in XDR. Now, if you observe closely, let me click on this incident. If you observe closely, we've made some cool new additions to this page. It's the same timeline as before, almost, but you can see 2 new alerts from Purview IRM that are there on this page. These alerts are talking about some new risks that were not available before. And detecting these risks might take significantly more expertise, and it might take more effort. So bringing these alerts right into the attack story timeline, we made the attack story much more comprehensive, covering all the risks you should be knowing about. And that is what excites me most about this integration, which is having all of this in one place. But let's start digging a little deeper into what some of these alerts are telling. I would start with the first alert. I'm referring to this Purview IRM sensitive Copilot response received. OK, we really can't have a session at this Ignite without using the word Copilot, so here's our turn. But this is interesting. This risk was not available before, right? This is a new category of alerts that we have announced recently, and this refers to a risky AI usage. What this detects is, users using Copilot applications and sensitive data being available either in the prompt or in the responses. And all these alerts are now integrated into Defender XDR so that when SOC analysts are looking at an incident, we also provide a perspective of how AI-based attacks are looking like. Let's click on this alert to start looking a little deeper. So this is how a typical IRM alert investigation looks like. IRM reasons over a large amount of data, and the insights are presented in an easy-to-understand timeline. So the center timeline you're seeing here, it's a timeline of all user behaviors. And the first user behavior is talking about this attacker has accessed Copilot. They managed to draw a sensitive response out. It also shows that the search has been attempted 4 times, and the responses referred to some highly confidential files. That is the sensitivity label on those files that we're referring to. It doesn't just stop there. You can also click on this behavior, and you can start seeing the raw logs themselves. Because as SOC analysts, we're never happy with summaries. We always want details. Just want to go deeper always. So that is where in one click you can access all the raw logs, see the event metadata, and for example, what files are referred to and things like that. For example, the file name used here is projectdetails.pdf. Please keep that in mind. We'll refer to that in the other alerts too. So if I have to step back here, we've seen a new alert category that is pointing to a new risk types that is available in XDR. And this is answering one question for us. How did this attacker discover the content so precisely? Now, if this alert was not there, the whole context of this discovery would have been missed, and that is the value we're adding here. Now, let's go to the next alert in this case. This is an alert that Shekhar has covered a little bit. So the same projectdetails.pdf, the attacker has attempted to exfiltrate here, and the exfiltration was blocked because the DLP policy blocked it. But the more important thing is, if you start putting these 2 alerts together, the picture that is forming is someone has entered your environment, leveraged Copilot to do a quick search, and then started exfiltrating that content, which in this case, thankfully, was blocked. But we already know how that story evolved, which is we have a smart attacker here. They're a little bit sophisticated. They were able to downgrade the labels, bypass some of the controls, and they successfully got a zip file out. But one difference you see with this new enhancement is the alert that caught the zip file, it is available right in the timeline. Previously, you had to take some manual steps to go in and figure out the user risk. What we thought was we bring it right onto the timeline so that the SOC analyst knows right away the whole extent of the incident they're looking at. So in this case, I'm referring to this second IRM alert that we have here. This alert is called sensitive data leaked. This is an existing policy in IRM which catches any data leakage that is happening from the organizations. Now, the reason this alert is raised, again, I'm moving to the center timeline to understand what did this user do and why this alert was raised. This alert was raised because a sequence of suspicious activities were detected on this user. Now, sequence is a really powerful detection in IRM that demonstrates a very strong intent to exfiltrate. Now, what we do to build a sequence is we take a set of user activities on a single file, and we correlate them into a coherent story. In this example, the sequence is telling that this attacker has downgraded the labels on SharePoint. They downloaded the files to the endpoint, and then did a bunch of stuff, uploaded the files again, and to cover their tracks, they deleted the file. Now, the correlation amongst all these events is what brought the sequence. And if I click on this specific sequence, I can also see that the details of the actual files. In this case, there were 4 files on which this sequence of activities were done. And our favorite file name is back. The project details.pdf is involved even in this sequence. Now, let's pull back again. There's a lot happening here. You can see that all the alerts are correlated into an incident. That way, you have a full picture of what is happening, all the threat categories that are involved. But at the same time, we are also showing you a deep dive of the actual events with their metadata. With that, you also know it's the same file that is being used across these alerts. So with that, you can put a picture together that says, OK, this project details.pdf, the attacker has accessed it to the Copilot, tried to exfiltrate it, couldn't, but did some sophisticated attempts, and finally managed to get through. So that I think pretty much summarizes the crux of this integration, where we bring together not only the alerts in a correlated fashion, but in the same console, you can access all the raw logs in a single click. Now, using this example, I also want to draw your attention a little bit to how the DLP and IRM capabilities are being complementary with each other here. In this case, DLP has identified that this file is sensitive, and that was blocked. But the attacker was able to bypass those controls, in which case IRM took a user-centric approach and started profiling all these behaviors and put that in an easily understandable way and also elevated the risk. So that is how these solutions can bring together across a wide range of attack scenarios to deliver robust data security capabilities. Now, this is just a start of the investigation, right? As investigators, we don't just stop here. We want to know what else did this attacker do in this tenant, Where else have they been in the tenant, or which other users they have compromised to? Maybe this is not the only user they have compromised. To do explorations like this, advanced hunting typically is the right place to go in XDR. But before I go further, I want to ask a question. How many of you here are familiar with advanced hunting in this room? Whoa, OK, that is popular. So then that's great. Then this will be a very easy to understand for you on how you can leverage the new capabilities that we're launching, which brings us to the second announcement that we have. We're also integrating all the insider risk management data in advanced hunting. And the objective is we want SOC analysts to be able to hunt across any data security risks also, along with other data that you have in advanced hunting. Before we go into the details of advanced hunting, I want to draw your attention to the same screen that we've seen before. Now, in that screen, there are two types of data which we are bringing into advanced hunting. The center one, where we detected all the sequences, all those cool detections that we had, we're adding a new table called data security behaviors. And that will contain all this kind of data. For example, if you want a list of users who are doing anomalous activities in your tenant, that is the table you go to. And we have a second table which we are adding, where all the raw logs, the metadata which you want access to, all these events will go into the second table, which is data security events. With that, I want to take a sample scenario. I want to show you, in the previous example, the SOC analyst has already identified that the attacker has compromised one user. But are there more users? How do we know their footprint in the tenant? Now, I want to show you how a SOC analyst can leverage advanced hunting to do that. It seems like a relatively simple query, but I want to draw your attention a little more to the result here. As SOC analysts, what we can do is, if you remember in the previous scenario, this attacker has uploaded to mag7upload.com. Now, I want to know, so this domain is associated with the attacker, that much I know. So now I want to know, are there any other users in the tenant communicating with the same domain, uploading files to the same domain? If yes, maybe I want to investigate more. So when we ran this query, we're showing an example where not only Mary Jensen, but there are two more users who are communicating with this domain. That raises my alarm a little bit. There is a chance these users are also compromised. And as next steps, I want to expand the scope of this breach. I would want to go and understand what these users are doing in the tenant. So that is how you can inform your next steps, trying to size up the whole breach using these new tables in advanced hunting. Okay. So that brings me to the end of the first scenario I wanted to discuss. But before I go to the next one, I want to quickly summarize. We've seen the same scenario that Shekhar has explained, where we've seen an attacker compromise a user, and then leveraged Copilot, and then did some sophisticated attempts, and we were able to catch all of it in the timeline. Not just the alerts, we were able to show you the full evidence right there in the same console without leaving the portal. Now, this is an external attacker scenario, but we want this integration to benefit the data security teams also, who typically focused on insider threats and other scenarios. So the same integration can be leveraged by the data security teams to do a much more deeper investigation into their incidents. So for the next scenario, I want to take an example of how you can investigate insider threats in XDR. So we'll take the classic insider threat example, where intellectual property theft by a departing user. This is a very common scenario that you see. You can see all the information about this alert right there in the portal. Now, the reason why this alert was triggered is there is an employee who has submitted their resignation. The data is coming in through the connectors. You can also see that this employee has shared some SharePoint files externally. You can see a quick summary of there are 2 files that match the priority content, which says that these are sensitive primarily. It's not that. It's not just that. You can also go into the raw activities, dig a little deeper, try to understand what happened. But this is all almost like an existing experience in Purview portal. The real magic comes after this. If I'm a data security analyst looking at this, I might ask, hey, is this a sanctioned activity or not? Maybe they're just sharing with a vendor, or maybe they're sharing with their personal email. We don't know that. So that's where typically data security analysts might want to go a step further and say, who else is communicating with this email in the tenant? Is this the only user who is talking to this email? Or are there other users who are communicating with this? It gives a totally different risk assessment in both the cases. So we can go ahead, run another hunting query, because all the data is in there. And in this case, the result came out slightly different. Only John is communicating with this specific email. So there are 10 confidential files that are shared with an email, and only this user is communicating with that email. Now, that definitely raises my alarm in this case. As next step, I might want to go and escalate this case, talk to the manager, talk to the HR to figure out the next steps. Now, this is the reason why you would want to do some of the investigations in XDR also to leverage all these powerful capabilities. I think we had enough investigation for a single session, especially around incidents. So maybe as a last scenario that I want to show, I want to focus on a little bit on controlling the alerts themselves. You've seen once an alert is generated, how do I investigate it? But how do we improve the accuracy of the alerts itself? Because end of the day, we all know things are noisy, takes a lot of time. So you can also leverage advanced hunting to understand some of the patterns in your tenant, like who's uploading to what domains and things like that. The reason it's important is, let's take an example of a file upload. It happens all the time, right? People are communicating with web domains all the time. So how do you know which domains are risky and which are not? Because there are a whole bunch of tools that are available to you to filter the alerts, to suppress the alerts. But you need to be informed by data on which alerts to suppress, which alerts to not. So we took another example of a hunting query. We ran a hunting query in the tenant that says, hey, show me the top 3 domains that users are exfiltrating to. It's the same types of query. You can see the same query being used in different flavors. And you can make more complex queries that involve confidential files and stuff like that. Now, in this example, let's drain the result a little bit. There are 3 domains that came up. Salesforce.com, top domain. It's most likely a business domain. You would not want to get alerted when upload happens to that domain, most likely. So you would want to suppress your alerts on this domain. The next one is TurboTax.com. It is an external domain, but most likely employees might be uploading their tax forms. It might be a benign activity. The upload might be happening, but it might not be risky for all you know. So you might want to treat that as a benign positive. But the third one is the actionable one, which is you see 180 users uploading files to gmail.com. Maybe they're doing the attachments to the emails. That I don't like, because this might be a potential data leak or an exfiltration. So as a SOC analyst, you can use these insights to suppress some of the alerts and also to put protection controls, especially on gmail.com. You can add this to your unallowed list. And like Shekhar explained before, you can apply a more restrictive DLP policy on it. And this is the way you can leverage all this data to tune the policies itself in your tenant. So that brings me to the end of all the scenarios. I want to summarize what we've heard just now. We took a look at 3 scenarios. The first scenario, how the new insider risk management alerts in Defender will help you investigate external attacks better. Second scenario, how can you even investigate insider threat scenarios in Defender by leveraging advanced hunting? Third scenario, how can you tune your tenant by using all the insights from advanced hunting? So that brings me to the end of the demo, but I would like to call Natalia to give the closing comments on this. Thank you.
Thank you, Shravan. This is very cool, right? So a round of applause, guys, to Shekhar and Shravan, and to all the PM and engineering teams from Purview and Defender that made all this possible. So yeah, we get very excited. So just a recap, what you saw today are the very, very exciting new integrations of insider risk management into Defender XDR. We have the alerts in the Defender incident investigation. We have the incredible addition of insider risk data in advanced hunting. How cool is that now the SOC and the data security teams can actually work together to create better tuning for the data security policies? So those are some of the things that we're bringing on. But we're not stopping there. So if you've been in one of the data security sessions, we know that there's a lot of data security announcements that we did this Ignite. So you can take a picture of this or reach out to one of our blogs to see all of these announcements being a little bit more explained. So through DLP, information protection, and insider risk management, there's a lot that we're bringing. Next steps, if you haven't been leveraging Purview, request access to the trial. You can also understand a little bit more about all the announcements of Microsoft Security as a whole in the Microsoft Security blog. I know it's already Thursday, but all the sessions that we did this week will be available for on demand, so you can also check out the videos of sessions like this one that we just gave you. And I will leave you with some resources. So this is an integration of Defender XDR and Purview, so both products will have resources in their pages. We also have a mechanics video that shows the beginning of that Shekhar explains a little bit how that works in practice with a little bit more detail. And we also have our Insider Risk Management Ignite blog that has a deep dive into everything that we announced today. And with that, thank you so much for staying with us. I hope you have a great ending to your Ignite experience. I hope you already have been having a great one, and enjoy your day. Thank you.